July 8th, 2024. At the Ohmatdyt Children's Hospital, it's business as usual. The largest pediatrics facility in Ukraine has been untouched by the war with Russia, mercifully left alone to provide treatment to youngsters in need. It shouldn't be a target. Those inside the hospital are innocent, with many not even comprehending the true scale of the conflict that surrounds them. The hospital has been safe until today. In a desperate attempt to damage Kyiv, Russia launched a wave of missile strikes against the city. Ohmatdyt Children's Hospital is one of the targets. The explosions caused major damage to the facility and killed 2 people. That attack was part of a larger-scale strike on the city, in which 36 people were killed and a further 140 injured. Speaking about the attack, a doctor named Leticia told the BBC about the moment the missiles struck. She describes the scenes as being like a film, noting that there was a big light followed by a truly awful sound. The aftermath, she said, revealed that one part of the hospital was destroyed and there was a fire in another. It's really very damaged, maybe 60 to 70% of the hospital. Russia has crossed a line. Ukraine has to respond. And respond it does. In this video, we'll go into detail on the devastating drone strikes Ukraine organized in the wake of Russia's attack on the children's hospital. But first, we'll explain the strike in more detail, including what missiles Russia used, what conducting such a strike says about Russia, and the claims made by Putin in the wake of the attack. We start with more information about the strike. Pictures that emerged from the scene showed sheer devastation. Children who just moments before had been receiving treatment inside the facility are now outside, pulling along their IV drips as they wait to be fully evacuated. Depending on your perspective, there is at least a small moment of good fortune. Though 2 people have died in the attack, both are confirmed to be adults. It appears that Russia has failed to kill any children in the strike, though that wasn't likely by choice. Kyiv's mayor Vitaly Klitschko revealed that information in the aftermath of the attack. However, he also served a chilling reminder that much of the hospital had been reduced to rubble. There was no telling how many, if any, people were trapped underneath all of that debris. More details emerged in the immediate aftermath of the missile strike. Ukrainian television notes that around 20 children were in the hospital at the time of the strike, most receiving treatment for cancer or being prepared for organ transplants. Klitschko also levied an accusation against Russia, claiming that this latest attack showcases a country that's attempting genocide of the population of Ukraine. He sent a message to the world saying that they can now see how Russian missiles and drones are killing Ukrainians in peaceful cities. As the day goes on, more details emerge, revealing the strike on the children's hospital to be part of a wider range of strikes, all involving Russian missiles. Klitschko notes that the children's hospital isn't the only Ukrainian medical facility that's been damaged. A separate maternity hospital, located in the Dniprovsky region of Ukraine, was also partially destroyed by falling debris caused by the bombs. There have been fatalities here too. 7 people are dead. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky later took to social media to explain that more than 40 missiles of different types had been launched at major Ukrainian cities. Kyiv was the main target, though Sloviansk, Dnipro, Kramatorsk, and Kryvyi Rih were also targeted. He joined Klitschko in saying that the eyes of the world must now be on Russia, calling again for a strong Western response to the blow that Russia has once again delivered on our population, on our land, on our children. On July 11th, 3 days after the strike, more details emerged about the damage caused. Human Rights Watch reports that the casualties caused by the Russian missile wave have increased as rescuers spend time sifting through the rubble. Now the tally stands at around 190 civilians injured, with 42 people having been killed. 5 of those people are children. More information is also made available about the scale of the damage caused to Ohmatdyt Children's Hospital. Speaking to the UN Security Council, the hospital director says that Russia's strike destroyed the hospital's traumatology and toxicology departments. It also caused severe damage to its oncology and surgical wings, as well as to its intensive care department. The director also reveals that several hundred children were in the hospital when air raid sirens went off at 9:52 a.m. Fortunately, most were evacuated in the hour between the sirens going off and the missiles landing, though several patients and staff were still in the hospital when the missiles hit. These patients included 3 who were undergoing heart surgery. As disturbing as all of these details are, Human Rights Watch reveals that this strike is far from the first that has targeted Ukrainian medical facilities. It says that at least 1,736 Ukrainian medical facilities have been damaged or destroyed in missile strikes and bombing runs, with Russia having set out its stall in terms of being willing to target these locations early in the war. For instance, March 9, 2022 saw a Russian bomb landing in the courtyard of Hospital No. 3 in Mariupol, destroying the facility's maternity and pediatric units, killing several staff members and patients. Details also begin to emerge about the missiles used in the strike. On July 10th, CNN reported that a UN assessment concluded that the missile used to strike the hospital was likely a Russian-made Kh-101 cruise missile. That conclusion aligns with that reached by several weapons experts in the immediate wake of the attack, CNN says, with analysis of both video footage of the strike and fragments left in its wake supporting the conclusion. One of those experts is Justin Bronk, who is a senior research fellow working for London's Royal United Services Institute. Speaking to CNN, he says that the footage showing the missile landing is exactly correct for the Kh-101, with the right dive angle, under power, and not tumbling or falling like a spent air defense missile might. Bronk mentions a spent air defense missile because the Russian propaganda machine went into overdrive following the attack. Social media was full of claims, both from pro-Russian accounts and those in favor of Vladimir Putin's aggression against Ukraine, that the weapon that struck the hospital wasn't a Russian missile at all. Instead, it was the spent shell of a Ukrainian aerial defense weapon, which had landed on the hospital as Kyiv desperately tried to take out Russian missiles that were en route to other targets. The evidence doesn't seem to support that claim. Instead, the UN report and analysis from other weapons experts all point to the Kh-101. According to Missile Threat, the Kh-101 is an air-launched cruise missile that's equipped with a conventional explosive warhead. Developed by Russia, it's intended as a stealth missile, with its main characteristic being its ability to fly lower than a typical missile, allowing it to avoid radar detection systems and stay out of the range of many air defense units. There is also a variant of the Kh-101 named the Kh-102, which has been adapted to allow it to carry a 250 kiloton nuclear warhead. Returning to the Kh-101, it's around 24.4 feet long and carries a 992-pound payload, with Russia also having the option of equipping it with high-explosive, submunition, or fragmentation payloads. It's also a rangy weapon. The missile can fly up to 1,739 miles en route to its target. Russia claims it can fly for even longer, with unconfirmed reports out of the Russian Ministry of Defense stating it had a range of 2,796 miles. Either way, it's a missile that Russia could have launched from behind the front lines, knowing that it can travel far enough to hit almost any target in Ukraine. Several Russian planes are capable of carrying the Kh-101, including the Su-32 strategic bomber, the Tu-60, and the Tu-95 MS-16. The missile is also equipped with an electro-optical correction system, allowing it to adjust course in the middle of its flight, and an onboard computer that allows the missile to conduct photographic analysis of terrain to aid these course corrections. Missile Threat says that the Kh-101 also uses an infrared imaging seeker as it reaches its terminal stage when it's nearing its target and is guided by the GLONASS satellite navigation system. It's the ideal missile for such a targeted strike. The Kh-101 can be fired from range, meaning Russia doesn't have to risk flying its planes over Kyiv and potentially put them under fire from aerial defenses, and it's accurate enough to hit its target. Nevertheless, Russia is still claiming that it didn't attack Ohmatdyt Children's Hospital. On July 9th, Dmitry Peskov, a Kremlin spokesperson, repeated Russia's denials, telling journalists that they should be guided by information that comes out of Russia's Ministry of Defense rather than reports they're reading elsewhere. That information, he claims, absolutely excludes that there were attacks on civilian targets and which states that we are talking about a failing anti-missile system. Again, the same denial. Ignoring for a moment that Ukraine even having to use an anti-missile system, failing or otherwise, would suggest that Russia had indeed launched missiles at civilian targets in Kyiv, the photographic evidence doesn't support Peskov's claims. The Kremlin is trying to cover its tracks, and it's doing so because the July 8th missile strike against the Children's Hospital reveals something damaging to Russia. Its military is eroding. That's according to a July 16th article published by The Conversation. It repeats the claim that this attack is far from the first instance in which Russia has targeted a hospital. Furthermore, it sheds light on the meaning behind one of Peskov's claims in the wake of the strike. The Kremlin spokesperson says that Russia only targets facilities it believes are being used for military purposes, a claim that the country has used to justify targeting hospitals in the past. There's just one problem. Ohmatdyt Children's Hospital is so far removed from the front lines of Russia's special military operation that it would be practically impossible to claim that it serves a military purpose. Of course, it's also a children's hospital, which makes it even more improbable that Russia could justify the attack with the same excuse. Instead, The Conversation argues Russia is engaging in an intentional campaign of disinformation, hence the claims of failing Ukrainian anti-air defenses, because it's trying to hide domestic issues. Those issues extend to its military, which it claims is being affected by the sanctions imposed upon it by the West. Though Russia has managed to protect itself from becoming an isolated nation as a result of these sanctions thanks to cutting deals with countries like Iran and North Korea, it's still facing problems. Chief among these is that the sanctions have prevented vital military electronics from reaching the country, Even as it ramps up production of artillery and missiles, Russia finds itself having to increasingly rely on civilian-made components, which degrade its weapons capabilities and make them less accurate than they would otherwise be. In other words, it's possible that Russia didn't actually target the Ohmatdyt Children's Hospital. Instead, the components being used in its Kh-101 missiles, which are among the most accurate in Russia's arsenal, may not be fit for purpose. That could lead to the missile flying off course, which could explain why it struck a children's hospital rather than whatever target Russia intended. Of course, the Kremlin would never admit such a fault, so it's trying to place the blame on failing Ukrainian equipment, even as the evidence mounts that the missile that struck Ohmatdyt Children's Hospital was indeed a Kh-101. So that leaves two possible situations. Either Russia is growing so desperate in its attempts to defeat Ukraine that it's willing to target the most innocent civilians to wreak terror, or its weapons are becoming less effective because of sanctions forcing the use of civilian components, meaning it's failing to strike its intended targets. Those failures can result in situations like the one seen in Kyiv on July 8th, which the Russian propaganda machine is being forced to spin because Moscow can't admit that its missiles might be faulty. Whatever the case may be, the fact remains that Russian missiles hit a children's hospital in Ukraine, and Ukraine had to retaliate. That brings us to the drone strikes Ukraine has launched in the wake of Russia's attack. President Zelensky made it clear that Ukraine would retaliate for the attacks in their immediate aftermath. Speaking at a press conference on July 8th, he told reporters that, "We will retaliate against these people. We will deliver a powerful response from our side to Russia for sure. The question to our partners is, can they respond?" These claims are notable for two reasons. First, they once again show Zelensky calling on Ukraine's Western supporters to do more in the fight against Russia. Though he didn't outright say, the implication is that he believes that Ukraine's allies should be more directly involved in the fighting. The latest rounds of aid, though generous, are not enough. The West needs to recognize that a Russia that's willing to target a children's hospital is a Russia that poses a threat to all of Europe. Zelensky is challenging the West to respond with force equal to that Russia is using against Ukraine. Second, Zelensky says, "We will deliver a powerful response from our side to Russia." In other words, Ukraine won't limit its response to Russia's strike to attacking Russia within its own borders. It's going to attack Russia in Russia. That's precisely what it did with its most recent drone strikes. On July 9th, Reuters reported that a fleet of Ukrainian drones attacked a pair of power substations and an oil depot located in several Russian regions that border Ukraine. Russian officials claim that the attacks featured dozens of drones and resulted in the power stations and oil depot catching fire, along with the death of one person. In a statement published on the Telegram social media platform, Russia's Ministry of Defense went into more detail. It claimed that the country's air defense systems managed to shoot 38 of Ukraine's drones out of the sky, with 21 of those drones being destroyed over the skies of Rostov. The oblast lies to Ukraine's southeast, near the disputed Crimea region. It's about 62 miles from the eastern border Ukraine shares with Russia, with the Independent noting that Rostov is also the largest city in Russia's southern region. The attacks didn't end there, as Russia also reported shooting down 7 drones over Kursk, another Russian city near the border with Ukraine. Interestingly, we see potentially more examples of Russian misinformation here. While Ukraine will naturally claim that the fires at the power stations and oil depots were caused by the drone strikes, Russia is trying to paint a different picture. In another Telegram post, Rostov Regional Governor Andrei Bocharov suggests that the drone attacks themselves were unsuccessful, with the depot and power stations being set ablaze as a result of debris falling from the drones after they were destroyed by anti-air defenses. That seems unlikely. Upstream provided more details about the oil depot fire, noting that it occurred in Kalash-on-Don, which sits within Russia's Volgograd region. The depot is operated by a subsidiary of Lukoil, Russia's second-largest energy company after Gazprom, and the strike involved dozens of drones. However, this time the account is slightly different. Where some local representatives claim that it was drone debris that caused the fire, Upstream reports that other regional authorities claim that at least 5 of Ukraine's drones scored direct hits on the oil depot. Whatever the case may be, Ukraine had a defined purpose in choosing this depot outside of getting revenge for the attack on Ohmatdyt Children's Hospital. The oil depot lies close to a canal that links the Don and Volga rivers, both of which are key Russian transportation routes. The depot has also grown in strategic importance to Russia since the outbreak of the Ukraine war because it's able to keep small river tankers stocked with oil that can be delivered to Russian troops in Crimea and those stationed along the shore of the Sea of Azov. By hitting that depot, Ukraine struck a key part of Russia's logistical network. Russia was still struggling to get the fire under control in the immediate aftermath of the attack, with the blaze reportedly spreading to a nearby bakery. The drone strikes wouldn't end there. On July 11th, Reuters reported on Russian claims that a Ukrainian drone strike on a courtyard in the Belgorod region had resulted in 5 children being injured. Writing on Telegram, Belgorod's regional governor, Vyacheslav Gladkov, said, "In the town of Shebekino, an explosive device was dropped deliberately from a drone in the courtyard of a multi-story apartment building. 5 children who were in the playground received various injuries, 2 of them in serious condition, and were taken to the regional children's hospital." Is that a potential misstep by Ukraine? Attacking a civilian courtyard with drones that injured children would take away the country's moral high ground. It's notable that Ukraine hasn't issued a denial of the attack, suggesting that it was responsible. Regardless, Belgorod has been a clear target of Ukraine, with a combination of this drone attack and shelling from Ukrainian forces leading to the July 17th decision to institute a lockdown of the region. Belgorod's governor says that public access to 14 of the region's villages will be restricted due to them being in the path of constant Ukrainian artillery bombardments. Checkpoints will be set up on access roads and representatives of law enforcement will be on duty there, claimed the governor, before pointing out that access to public transport, including taxis, will be banned from July 23rd. Gladkov also announced that Russia's military will start guarding residents' homes, because they show that Russia's attempts to take the Kyiv region of Ukraine are faltering. Putin's goal in his assault on this region was to create a buffer zone between Belgorod and Ukraine, with Kyiv itself becoming a new front line that would take Ukraine's focus away from Russian territory. That isn't what happened. Instead, Russian forces have been pushed back to the point where Ukraine can now conduct artillery and drone strikes on another key piece of Russian border territory. Ukraine's revenge for the missile attack on Ohmatdyt Children's Hospital didn't end there. On July 16th, Ukraine again targeted Russia's Kursk region with drone assaults. Lying north of Belgorod, Kursk is another Russian border region, meaning it's another region it had hoped to protect by taking Kyiv. With that offensive having failed, Ukraine is now showing Russia that it can strike further afield than Belgorod, and that it may even be working to push the Kyiv section of the front line so far back that it enters Russia. As for the drone strike, Reuters reports that the attack took place on the town of Koronevo, with the drones triggering a fire at a local factory dedicated to producing electrical devices. Remember what we mentioned earlier? Russia has been forced to use civilian-produced electronic components in its weapons because of the impact sanctions have had on its military supply lines. While it's not confirmed that this factory was creating components for use in Russian weapons, it's certainly plausible. Thus, Ukraine can claim it struck a legitimate military target. Local governors in the town say that the attack wounded 6 people, with 1 being injured when a drone supposedly dropped its payload on a house in the town. No one else was harmed, with Kursk's interim governor, Alexei Smirnov, claiming that the fire was extinguished by the morning after the strike took place. It wasn't enough to save the factory. By now it's clear that Ukraine is launching concerted drone strikes in Russian territory. Russia's defense ministry even noted that it had shot down a further 13 Ukrainian drones on the night of the factory attack, one of which was flying over Kursk, to go along with the dozens shot down on July 9th. So we come to another question. What does Russia's missile strike on a Ukrainian children's hospital mean for the future of the war? We already have some of our answers. Though Ukraine already had permission from several of its Western partners to use the weapons they supply in Russian territory, with the US noting that it could do so in the Kyiv region, the Russian strike appears to have ramped up these attacks. Ukraine isn't holding back. Over the course of about a week, it's conducted drone attacks on at least 3 Russian border regions, damaging several key pieces of infrastructure in the process. The point here is that the Ukraine war is no longer being fought solely within Ukraine's borders. It's extending into Russia. With Ukraine now emboldened to conduct such strikes, Russia may find that the border towns it's been using to keep its troops supplied will become consistent targets for Ukraine's drones, artillery, and missiles. We've seen this already with the attacks on the Kalach-on-Don oil depot, which has helped to keep oil and fuel flowing to the Russian soldiers in Crimea and South Ukraine. We've also seen how the hospital attack potentially showcases Russian desperation and a potential eroding of its military might. Russia has tried to pin the attack on a Ukrainian failing, though all of the evidence suggests otherwise. That leads to 2 potential conclusions. Either Russia deliberately targeted the hospital, meaning it's crossed a key line and has gone back on its claims that its strikes within Ukraine would only target military facilities, or its missiles are becoming less accurate due to the impact of sanctions, which actually bodes well for Ukraine in the future. Yes, a Russian missile fault may be responsible for the destruction of a children's hospital, but the less accurate and reliable Russia's munitions become, the more opportunities Ukraine will have to take advantage of Moscow's eroding ability to coordinate its attacks. There is another consequence of Russia's attack on the Ohmatdyt Children's Hospital. It's further galvanized the international condemnation of Russia's actions in Ukraine. On July 12th, the International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA, which is the UN's nuclear watchdog, held a meeting of its board of governors. Collectively, they passed a motion condemning the strike on the Ohmatdyt Children's Hospital, assigning blame to Russia, and effectively quashing any claims from Moscow that the hospital was damaged by faulty Ukrainian anti-air missiles. The board, which includes representatives from 35 nations, passed the resolution with a vote of 20-2, with 12 member nations choosing to abstain. Though the IAEA vote won't mean much in terms of Ukraine receiving additional support during the war, it at least sends a message to Russia that the international community isn't buying what it's selling regarding how it claims the hospital was damaged. Finally, this sad story ends on a somewhat positive note. On July 16th, the same day that Ukraine launched its successful attack against a factory in Kursk, Euronews reported that the Ohmatdyt Children's Hospital had partially reopened. Work is still ongoing to repair the facility, which includes the use of heavy machinery to remove the rubble from the scene. Financially, that will be taken care of. Zelensky says that he's dedicated around $9.6 million to getting the hospital fully operational again. For now, staff and patients are returning in limited numbers. Perhaps that's somewhat symbolic of what this attack means to Ukraine. No matter how hard it's been hit, it's determined to get back up and fighting. And now, galvanized by the prospect of facing a Russia that's no longer following its own rules of war, it has the courage to strike in Russian territory rather than merely defending its own. But what do you think? Is there any credence to Russia's claims that it was a Ukrainian anti-air missile that actually destroyed Ohmatdyt Children's Hospital? What do you think about Russia's claims that Ukraine's retaliatory drone strikes have also injured children? And where do you think that both Russia and Ukraine go next in the war, now that Ukraine appears to be making headway in attacks near the beleaguered Kyiv region? Share your opinions in the comments below, and thank you for watching the video.